Sarah Martinez had always believed that trust was the foundation of any successful expedition. As she adjusted her climbing harness at the base of Eagle's Peak, the towering limestone cliff that had claimed 3 lives in the past decade, she looked around at her team of 5 experienced climbers. They had trained together for 8 months, planning every detail of this rescue mission that would test both their technical skills and their ability to work as a unified team. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley below, as Sarah reviewed the mission briefing one final time. A research team studying rare alpine birds had been stranded on a narrow ledge approximately 2,000 feet up the mountain's eastern face. Their emergency beacon had been transmitting for 36 hours, and weather forecasts showed a severe storm system approaching within the next 18 hours. This was their only window for a successful rescue. Marcus Chen, the team's lead technical climber, was methodically checking his gear when he noticed Sarah's focused expression. "Everything looks solid," he said, his voice carrying the confidence that had made him Sarah's first choice for this mission. "The route we mapped out should get us to the stranded team within 4 hours if conditions hold." Rachel Torres, their communications specialist, was testing the radio equipment that would keep them connected to base camp throughout the ascent. Her expertise in emergency communications had saved countless lives during her 15-year career with mountain rescue services. She gave Sarah a thumbs up, indicating all systems were functioning perfectly. David Kim and Elena Rodriguez completed the team. David's medical training made him invaluable for treating any injuries they might encounter, while Elena's expertise in high-altitude photography meant she could document every aspect of the rescue for future training purposes and official records. Both had volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks involved. Sarah had been chosen to lead this operation not just because of her technical climbing abilities, but because of her track record in crisis management. Over the past 12 years, she had successfully coordinated 47 mountain rescue operations without losing a single team member or victim. Her methodical approach and ability to make quick decisions under pressure had earned her respect throughout the mountain rescue community. The team began their ascent using a combination of traditional climbing techniques and modern rescue equipment. Sarah set the pace, establishing anchor points every 100 feet that would serve as safety stations and rest points during their climb. The rock face was more challenging than their reconnaissance had suggested, with several sections requiring advanced technical maneuvers that tested even their considerable skills. As they climbed higher, the physical demands of the ascent began to take their toll. The combination of heavy rescue equipment and the technical difficulty of the route meant they were moving slower than originally planned. Sarah made the decision to establish a temporary camp on a broad ledge at the 1,500-foot mark, allowing the team to rest and reassess their approach to the upper sections of the climb. During this break, Sarah noticed subtle changes in the group dynamics that hadn't been apparent during their training sessions. Marcus seemed unusually eager to push forward, despite the obvious fatigue affecting the entire team. Rachel appeared distracted, frequently checking her personal communication device, rather than focusing on the mission radio protocols. David and Elena were engaged in quiet conversations that stopped whenever Sarah approached. The afternoon weather began to deteriorate faster than meteorologists had predicted. Cloud formations were building over the western ridges, and wind speeds were increasing steadily. Sarah knew they had perhaps 3 hours of safe climbing conditions remaining before they would need to abort the mission and establish shelter until the storm passed. "We need to make a decision," Sarah announced during their brief rest stop. "Either we commit to reaching the stranded team within the next 2 hours, or we establish a secure bivouac and wait for better conditions tomorrow morning." Marcus immediately advocated for pushing forward. His argument was logical and compelling. The stranded research team had been exposed to harsh conditions for more than 36 hours, and their situation would only worsen if they spent another night on the mountain. However, Sarah's instincts told her that something about his urgency felt wrong, though she couldn't identify exactly what was troubling her. Rachel supported Marcus's position, citing weather reports that suggested the storm might last longer than initially forecast. She argued that waiting could mean missing their opportunity entirely if conditions didn't improve as expected. Her technical knowledge of weather patterns added weight to her recommendation. David and Elena remained quiet during this discussion, which Sarah found unusual given their typically active participation in mission planning. When she directly asked for their opinions, Both deferred to whatever decision she felt was best as team leader. Their reluctance to engage in the decision-making process raised additional concerns in Sarah's mind. After carefully weighing all factors, Sarah decided they would continue the ascent. Her decision was based primarily on her responsibility to the stranded research team, whose situation would indeed become more desperate with each passing hour. However, she insisted on implementing additional safety protocols that would slow their progress but reduce the risks they faced. The team resumed climbing with renewed determination, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in their group dynamic. Small details that individually seemed insignificant began forming a pattern that troubled her. Marcus was taking unnecessary risks in his climbing choices. Rachel was providing incomplete information during radio checks, and David and Elena continued their secretive conversations whenever they thought Sarah wasn't listening. As they approached the 1,800-foot mark, the technical difficulty of the climb increased dramatically. The rock face became nearly vertical, with limited options for secure anchor points. Sarah was concentrating on establishing a particularly challenging belay station when she heard Rachel's voice behind her. "Sarah, we need to discuss something important," Rachel said, her tone carrying an unusual formality that immediately put Sarah on alert. The entire team had gathered on a narrow ledge barely wide enough to accommodate all 5 climbers. Sarah noticed that Marcus had positioned himself slightly behind her, while David and Elena flanked her on both sides. Only Rachel remained directly in front of her, and something in her expression made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. "The rescue committee met yesterday evening after our final briefing," Rachel began, her voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. "There were concerns raised about your decision-making process during the Mount Cascade incident last month." Sarah's mind immediately went to the successful rescue operation where she had chosen an unconventional route that ultimately saved precious time and potentially lives. "What kind of concerns?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand that this conversation was not really about her past performance. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his movement subtle but deliberate. "The committee felt that your tendency to take unnecessary risks might compromise team safety on this mission. They asked us to reassess the leadership structure if we encountered situations that required it." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She realized that this entire conversation had been planned in advance and that her team members had been meeting without her knowledge to discuss removing her from command. The betrayal felt deeper than any professional disagreement. These were people she had trusted with her life on multiple occasions. "I see," Sarah said quietly, her mind racing through the implications of what was happening. "And what exactly does this reassessment involve?" Elena finally spoke, her voice barely audible above the increasing wind. "We think Marcus should take over as lead climber for the remainder of the mission. Your technical skills are adequate, but this situation requires someone with more aggressive climbing abilities." The casual dismissal of her abilities stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. She had spent years developing her technical skills and had consistently performed at the highest levels during the most challenging rescues. More importantly, she had never lost a team member or failed to complete a mission objective. David added his voice to the group consensus. "It's nothing personal, Sarah. We just think the team dynamics would be better with Marcus in charge. You can still participate in the rescue, but in a support role rather than making the critical decisions." Sarah looked around at the faces of her teammates, people she had considered friends as well as professional colleagues. She saw determination in Marcus's expression, guilt in Rachel's averted gaze, and uncomfortable resignation in David and Elena's body language. The conspiracy had clearly been developing for some time, probably since the mission planning began. "This is interesting timing for such a major change," Sarah observed, her voice remaining calm despite the emotions churning inside her. "We're 1,800 feet up a dangerous rock face approaching the most technical section of the climb, and you've decided this is the moment to restructure our leadership." Marcus's response was immediate and aggressive. "That's exactly why we need to make this change now. The upper sections require decisive action, not the cautious approach you've been taking. Every minute we spend debating puts the stranded team at greater risk." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that they were currently spending precious time on this leadership coup rather than focusing on the rescue mission. However, she recognized that arguing the point would only waste more time and potentially escalate the confrontation into something more dangerous. If the majority of the team feels this strongly about the change, I'm not going to fight it, Sarah said finally. But I want it clearly understood that I disagree with both the timing and the reasoning behind this decision. Rachel's relief was visible as she realized Sarah wasn't going to resist their plans. We appreciate your professionalism about this, Sarah. Once we complete the mission successfully, I'm sure the committee will recognize that this was the right choice for everyone involved. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Sarah's mind struggled to process the sequence of events. Marcus moved toward her, ostensibly to take over her position as lead climber. As he reached for her climbing harness to disconnect her from the anchor point, his foot slipped on a patch of loose rock near the edge of the narrow ledge. His instinctive grab for stability caught Sarah's shoulder, and the momentum of his falling weight pulled her off balance. For a terrifying moment, she teetered on the edge of the precipice, her arms windmilling as she tried to regain her footing. The drop below was more than 800 feet to the rocky talus slopes, where no one could survive such a fall. Rachel screamed as Sarah disappeared over the edge, her figure becoming smaller as she fell through the mountain air. The team rushed to the ledge edge, expecting to see Sarah's broken body far below. Instead, they saw something that made them question what had actually happened in those chaotic seconds. Sarah had managed to grab a small outcropping about 20 feet below their position. Her climbing experience and quick reflexes had allowed her to arrest her fall, but she was now hanging from a precarious handhold with no immediate way to climb back up to rejoin the team. "Hold on, Sarah!" David shouted down to her. "We're going to get a rope to you." But as the team scrambled to organize a rescue effort for their former leader, Sarah was already assessing her situation with the analytical mindset that had made her such an effective rescue coordinator. The handhold she was gripping was solid enough to support her weight temporarily, but not indefinitely. More importantly, she could see a possible climbing route that led across the face to another ledge system that might allow her to regain the main climbing route. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. The team had removed her from leadership because they thought she was too cautious. But now they would need to implement an aggressive rescue plan to save her from a fall that had resulted from their aggressive leadership change. As Sarah began the most challenging free climb of her life, she could hear her former teammates arguing above about how to proceed. Marcus was insisting they continue with the original mission, leaving Sarah to find her own way back to safety. Rachel was arguing that they couldn't abandon a team member, regardless of the circumstances that had led to her predicament. Sarah forced herself to focus on the immediate challenges of her climb, rather than the betrayal and anger she felt toward her teammates. Each handhold and foothold required complete concentration, as any mistake would send her falling to certain death on the rocks below. The climbing route she had identified was more difficult than anything she had ever attempted without proper safety equipment. She was essentially free-soloing a section of cliff that would normally require multiple anchor points and careful belay techniques. However, her years of experience and intimate knowledge of rock climbing techniques gave her the confidence to attempt moves that would be impossible for less skilled climbers. As she worked her way across the cliff face, Sarah's mind was also processing the implications of what had happened on the ledge. The accident that had nearly killed her had occurred at a very convenient moment for Marcus, who now had undisputed leadership of the mission. Whether his fall had been genuinely accidental or something more deliberate was a question that would require careful consideration once she was back on safe ground. The first 20 minutes of Sarah's climb across the cliff face tested every technique she had learned during her 15 years of mountaineering. Without ropes or safety equipment, each move had to be perfect. Her fingers, already cramped from the cold mountain air, found purchase on limestone holds that seemed impossibly small. The rock face angled outward in several places, forcing her to climb inverted sections where her core strength was the only thing preventing a fatal fall. Sarah's breathing remained controlled, despite the physical and mental stress of her situation. Years of emergency rescue training had taught her to compartmentalize fear and focus on immediate survival tasks. She could hear her former teammates shouting from above, their voices growing fainter as she worked her way across the cliff face toward what appeared to be a more substantial ledge system. The route she had chosen led her past several interesting geological formations that she had never noticed during their reconnaissance of the mountain. Ancient water channels carved deep grooves in the limestone, creating natural handholds that suggested this cliff face had once been part of an underground river system. The discovery was fascinating from a geological perspective, but more importantly, these channels might provide easier climbing routes than the standard paths they had planned to use. After 40 minutes of careful climbing, Sarah reached the ledge system she had spotted from below. The platform was roughly 6 feet wide and 12 feet long, providing enough space for her to rest and assess her situation more thoroughly. Her hands were bleeding from several small cuts and her forearms ached from the sustained grip strength required for the traverse, but she was alive and in a position where she could plan her next moves. From this vantage point, Sarah could see the entire eastern face of the mountain, with much greater clarity than had been possible from their original climbing route. The stranded research team was visible as small figures on a ledge approximately 400 feet above her current position. More importantly, she could see a series of natural chimneys and crack systems that offered a more direct route to their location than the path her team was currently following. The weather conditions were continuing to deteriorate as the afternoon wore on. Cloud formations were building rapidly over the western peaks, and the wind was beginning to carry the scent of approaching rain. Sarah estimated they had perhaps 2 hours of safe climbing weather remaining, which meant that any rescue attempt would need to be executed quickly and efficiently. Sarah's radio had been damaged during her fall, leaving her unable to communicate directly with either her team or the base camp. However, she could hear fragments of radio traffic that suggested Marcus was continuing with the original rescue plan, despite the challenging conditions. His voice carried over the mountain air occasionally, though she couldn't make out specific words or understand the full context of his communications. The isolation gave Sarah time to reflect on the events that had led to her current predicament. The more she considered the timing and coordination of her team's betrayal, the more convinced she became that this had been planned well in advance of their mission. The rescue committee meeting that Rachel had mentioned was probably fictitious, designed to provide legitimacy for what was essentially a mutiny. Marcus had always been ambitious, and Sarah now remembered several recent conversations where he had questioned her leadership decisions in ways that seemed designed to undermine her authority rather than improve mission outcomes. Rachel's technical expertise made her a valuable ally for anyone seeking to challenge Sarah's position, and her control over communications equipment gave her significant influence over how events were reported to outside authorities. David and Elena's participation was more puzzling to Sarah. Both had worked with her successfully on multiple previous missions, and neither had shown any signs of dissatisfaction with her leadership style. Their reluctance to speak during the confrontation suggested they might have been coerced or manipulated into supporting the leadership change against their better judgment. As Sarah considered these interpersonal dynamics, she was also developing a tactical plan for completing the rescue mission on her own. Her current position actually provided several advantages over the route her team was following. The natural climbing features she had discovered would allow for faster movement, with less equipment, and her isolated position meant she could take calculated risks without endangering other team members. The stranded research team appeared to consist of 3 individuals, though the distance made it difficult to assess their physical condition or the severity of their situation. Sarah could see that their ledge was accessible from multiple directions, which suggested that a single skilled climber might be able to reach them more quickly than a larger team using conventional rescue techniques. Sarah began climbing toward the stranded team using a combination of free climbing and natural anchor points created by the geological features she had discovered. The route was technically challenging but significantly more direct than the path her former teammates were following. Her progress was steady despite the physical fatigue from her earlier traverse and the emotional stress of the day's events. The first section of her solo ascent took her through a series of narrow chimneys formed by parallel cracks in the limestone. These features provided excellent protection from the increasing wind while offering secure handholds and footholds that allowed for rapid vertical progress. Sarah's smaller frame was actually an advantage in these confined spaces, as she could move through sections that would have been difficult or impossible for larger climbers. As she climbed higher, Sarah began to hear voices from the stranded research team. Their conversations suggested they were in reasonably good physical condition, though they had been dealing with exposure to harsh mountain conditions for more than 40 hours. One voice belonged to a woman who seemed to be providing leadership and reassurance to the other 2 team members. The approaching storm was becoming more threatening with each passing minute. Lightning was beginning to flicker in the distance, and the wind was carrying the first drops of rain that would soon make the rock face dangerously slippery. Sarah knew she had perhaps 30 minutes to reach the stranded team and assess their rescue options before weather conditions made any movement extremely hazardous. From her position roughly halfway between her starting point and the stranded team, Sarah could see her former teammates still following their original route. Marcus was leading the climb, but their progress seemed slower than it should have been, given the relatively straightforward nature of that section of the cliff face. Rachel appeared to be having difficulties with her equipment, and David and Elena were bunched together rather than maintaining proper spacing for efficient team movement. The sight of her team's struggles validated Sarah's decision to attempt the rescue on her own. Their lack of coordination suggested that Marcus's leadership was not providing the improved efficiency they had claimed would result from removing her from command. More troubling was the possibility that their poor performance was deliberate, designed to delay the rescue and create plausible justification for mission failure. Sarah reached a crucial decision point in her climb, where she could either continue directly toward the stranded team or angle toward her original team's position to rejoin their rescue effort. The choice would determine not only the immediate outcome of the rescue mission, but also the future dynamics of her relationships with her teammates and her standing within the mountain rescue community. Choosing to continue her solo rescue attempt meant accepting full responsibility for the lives of 3 stranded individuals while operating without backup support or emergency communication capabilities. Failure would result in multiple casualties and would likely end her career in mountain rescue operations. Success, however, would demonstrate that her leadership and technical abilities were superior to those of the people who had betrayed her trust. Rejoining her original team would restore their full rescue capabilities and increase the likelihood of a successful outcome for the stranded research team. However, it would also validate Marcus's leadership coup and potentially establish a precedent for future challenges to her authority. The personal cost of such a choice felt almost as significant as the professional implications. Sarah decided to continue her solo ascent toward the stranded team. Her choice was motivated primarily by her assessment that she could reach them faster and more safely than her former teammates, given their current rate of progress and the deteriorating weather conditions. The personal satisfaction of proving her superior abilities was a secondary consideration, though she couldn't deny its influence on her decision. The final section of Sarah's climb required her to traverse another exposed face where the holds were smaller and less secure than anything she had encountered earlier. The approaching storm was creating updrafts that made her clothing whip around her body, interfering with her vision and balance. Rain was beginning to fall steadily, making the rock surface increasingly treacherous with each passing minute. Despite these challenges, Sarah's technical climbing skills allowed her to maintain steady progress toward the stranded team's position. Her years of experience in adverse conditions had prepared her for exactly this type of situation, where mental toughness and precise technique were more important than physical strength or elaborate equipment. As she approached the ledge where the research team was stranded, Sarah could finally see their faces and assess their condition more accurately. The team consisted of 2 men and 1 woman, all appearing to be in their 30s or 40s. They were dressed in appropriate outdoor clothing but lacked the specialized equipment necessary for self-rescue from their precarious position. The woman who had been providing leadership to the group noticed Sarah's approach first. Her expression showed surprise and relief, followed quickly by concern as she realized that Sarah was climbing alone without visible safety equipment. "Are you part of the rescue team?" she called out, her voice barely audible above the increasing wind. "I'm Sarah Martinez with Mountain Rescue," Sarah replied as she completed the final moves to reach their ledge. "We're going to get you off this mountain, but we need to move quickly because of the weather." The 3 stranded individuals introduced themselves as Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Dr. Michael Chen, and graduate student Tom Rodriguez. They had been conducting research on rare alpine bird species when a rockfall had damaged their climbing equipment and trapped them on the ledge. Walsh's leadership during their ordeal had kept the group organized and prevented panic, which would make the rescue operation significantly easier. Sarah quickly assessed their physical condition and determined that all 3 were capable of participating actively in their own rescue. Dr. Chen had suffered minor injuries from falling rocks, but nothing that would prevent him from following instructions and moving carefully during the descent. Tom was the youngest and most physically capable of the group, which meant he could potentially assist with some of the technical aspects of their evacuation. The rescue plan Sarah developed took advantage of the natural climbing features she had discovered during her solo ascent. Rather than attempting to lower the stranded team down the cliff face using traditional rescue techniques, she would guide them across the mountain to an easier descent route that required less specialized equipment. This approach was faster and safer given the deteriorating weather conditions, though it required the rescued individuals to actively participate in technically challenging climbing moves. Dr. Walsh expressed concern about their ability to complete such a demanding descent without extensive climbing experience. Sarah's response was both reassuring and realistic. "You've already survived 2 days on this mountain under extremely difficult conditions. The climb down will require careful attention to my instructions, but it's well within your physical and mental capabilities." As Sarah began implementing her rescue plan, she could see her original team still working their way up the cliff face using their conventional approach. Marcus appeared to be experiencing difficulties with a particularly challenging section of the route, and their overall progress had slowed dramatically since the storm arrived. Rachel was attempting to maintain radio contact with base camp, but the increasing electrical activity in the atmosphere was interfering with their communications. The irony of the situation was becoming increasingly apparent. Sarah's solo rescue effort was proceeding more efficiently than the coordinated team approach that Marcus had insisted would be superior to her leadership. The stranded research team was responding well to her instructions and showing the kind of confidence in her abilities that her own teammates had refused to demonstrate. Sarah's years of experience in crisis management allowed her to maintain focus on the immediate tasks of the rescue, while simultaneously processing the broader implications of the day's events. The successful completion of this mission would provide clear evidence of her superior judgment and technical abilities, but it would also mark the end of her working relationships with 4 people who had been important parts of her professional and personal life. The descent began just as the full force of the storm reached Eagles Peak. Lightning illuminated the mountain in stark flashes that revealed the treacherous terrain they would need to navigate. Sarah positioned herself between Dr. Chester, Walsh, and the cliff edge, using her body as a human anchor while guiding the research team across the narrow ledges that would lead them to safety. Dr. Chen proved to be surprisingly agile despite his earlier injuries, following Sarah's instructions with the precision of someone who understood the life-or-death nature of their situation. Tom Rodriguez's youth and athletic background made him the strongest climber among the rescued individuals, allowing Sarah to assign him additional responsibilities that helped speed their progress down the mountain. The route Sarah had chosen took advantage of natural features that provided both handholds and protection from the worst effects of the storm. Ancient water channels carved into the limestone offered secure grips even when wet, while overhanging sections of rock created sheltered areas where the team could rest and reassess their progress. As they worked their way across the cliff face, Dr. Walsh shared details about their research that explained why they had been climbing in such a remote and dangerous area. Their team had been tracking a rare species of alpine bird that nested only in the most inaccessible cliff environments. The location where they became stranded was actually one of the primary nesting sites they had been studying, and their equipment included valuable research data that represented months of careful observation and documentation. The information about their research added another layer of complexity to the rescue operation. The scientific equipment and data they carried could not be easily replaced, and losing it would set back their research program by potentially years. However, carrying the additional weight of their research gear would significantly increase the technical difficulty of their descent and the time required to reach safety. Sarah made the tactical decision to cache most of the heavy research equipment in a protected location where it could be retrieved later under better conditions. She kept only the most critical data storage devices and essential survival gear, reducing the weight burden on the rescued team while preserving the most important elements of their research work. The decision demonstrated the kind of practical problem-solving that had made Sarah an effective rescue coordinator. Rather than viewing the situation in terms of rigid protocols or predetermined procedures, she adapted her approach to address the specific circumstances they faced. The flexibility to modify standard rescue techniques based on real-time conditions was exactly the kind of leadership quality that her teammates had failed to appreciate. As they continued their descent, Sarah's radio began picking up fragments of communication from her original team. The conversations she could hear suggested that Marcus was encountering significant difficulties with the conventional rescue approach. Equipment problems and coordination issues were slowing their progress, and the deteriorating weather was creating safety concerns that threatened to force them to abandon the rescue attempt entirely. Rachel's voice came through the static occasionally, reporting their status to base camp in terms that made their situation sound more successful than Sarah's observations suggested. The disconnect between Rachel's optimistic reports and the obvious struggles visible on the cliff face raised questions about the accuracy of information being provided to rescue coordination authorities. Sarah chose not to attempt radio contact with her original team or base camp, partly because her equipment had been damaged during the fall, but mainly because she wanted to complete the rescue without interference from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to sabotage her leadership. The decision to maintain radio silence was tactically sound, but would later create complications when she needed to document the events of the rescue operation. The most technically challenging section of their descent required crossing a 60-foot gap between ledge systems, using a natural rock bridge that was barely 18 inches wide. The formation had been created by geological processes over thousands of years, but it remained solid enough to support human weight if traversed carefully and with proper technique. Dr. Walsh initially expressed reluctance to attempt such an exposed crossing, especially given the storm conditions that made visibility poor and footing treacherous. Sarah's response combined practical instruction with psychological reassurance. This crossing looks more dangerous than it actually is. The rock is solid, the path is wide enough for secure footing, and I'll be positioned to provide support if anyone experiences difficulty. Tom Rodriguez volunteered to cross first, demonstrating the route for the other team members and providing an additional safety anchor on the far side of the gap. His successful crossing boosted confidence for Dr. Walsh and Dr. Grass. Chen, who completed their own traverses without significant difficulty despite their obvious nervousness about the exposure. The successful completion of the rock bridge crossing marked a turning point in the rescue operation. The remaining descent would be technically easier and would bring them to terrain where traditional hiking skills would be sufficient to reach safety. More importantly, the psychological victory of overcoming their most challenging obstacle had transformed the rescued team from passive victims into active participants in their own survival. Sarah's leadership during this critical phase demonstrated the difference between technical competence and true expertise. Her ability to inspire confidence in people facing life-threatening situations was based not just on her climbing skills, but on her understanding of human psychology under extreme stress. The rescued team trusted her judgment because she had proven her ability to make good decisions under pressure, while clearly explaining the reasoning behind her instructions. As they approached the final sections of their descent, Sarah could see her original team still struggling with their conventional rescue approach. Marcus appeared to have made a critical error in route selection that had led them into a dead-end section of the cliff face. Rachel and the others were gathered around him in what appeared to be an animated discussion about how to proceed. The sight of her former teammates arguing among themselves while she successfully completed the rescue mission they had claimed she was incapable of handling provided a form of vindication that felt both satisfying and sad. These were people she had worked with for years, and their failure reflected not just on their technical abilities, but on their character and judgment. Dr. Walsh noticed Sarah watching her original team and asked about the relationship between the two groups. Sarah's explanation was brief and factual. They're part of the same rescue organization, but we had a disagreement about the best approach to reach you. I decided to proceed independently rather than delay the rescue while we resolved our differences. The diplomatic nature of Sarah's response impressed the research team, who recognized that there were probably significant personal and professional conflicts underlying the apparent coordination problems. Chen later commented that Sarah's ability to focus on the rescue mission rather than internal disputes demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership that had kept them alive during their ordeal. The final hour of their descent brought them through increasingly familiar terrain as they approached the base of the cliff system. The storm was beginning to pass, though rain continued to fall steadily and lightning remained a threat in the higher elevations. Sarah maintained a careful pace that balanced the need for speed against the risks created by wet rock and reduced visibility. Base camp became visible in the distance as they rounded a ridge that had blocked their view of the valley below. The site of the rescue staging area with its emergency vehicles and communication equipment represented safety and the successful completion of their dangerous journey down the mountain. However, Sarah knew that reaching base camp would also mean confronting the aftermath of her conflict with her teammates and explaining her decision to complete the rescue independently. The rescued research team's gratitude towards Sarah was evident in their expressions and comments as they approached safety. Walsh had regained enough composure to begin thinking about the broader implications of their rescue, and she made several observations about Sarah's exceptional competence that would later become important when authorities investigated the events of the day. "I've been involved in outdoor activities for 20 years, Dr. Temp Walsh told Sarah as they made their final approach to base camp. "I've never seen anyone combine technical skill with leadership ability the way you did today. Your decision to attempt the rescue alone probably saved our lives given how quickly the weather deteriorated." Tom Rodriguez was equally impressed by Sarah's performance, particularly her ability to adapt rescue techniques to their specific situation rather than following a rigid protocol that might not have been appropriate for the conditions they faced. His background in outdoor sports gave him enough technical knowledge to appreciate the difficulty of what Sarah had accomplished without proper equipment or team support. Chen's perspective as a scientist made him particularly observant about the problem-solving methods Sarah had used throughout the rescue operation. He noted her systematic approach to risk assessment, her ability to modify plans based on changing conditions, and her skill at communicating complex technical information in ways that non-experts could understand and implement. The base camp personnel were surprised to see Sarah arriving with the rescued team, as the last radio communications they had received indicated that Marcus was leading the rescue effort and that Sarah was no longer part of the operation. The confusion was evident in their initial responses, which ranged from relief at the successful rescue to uncertainty about what had happened to the rest of the rescue team. Sarah provided a brief but accurate summary of the events that had led to her independent rescue effort. Her account focused on the tactical decisions and technical aspects of the operation rather than the interpersonal conflicts that had precipitated her separation from the team. The professional tone of her report impressed the base camp coordinator, who recognized the difficulty of maintaining such objectivity after experiencing what amounted to a betrayal by trusted colleagues. The rescued research team strongly supported Sarah's version of events and provided enthusiastic testimony about her competence and professionalism during the rescue operation. Their independent perspective carried significant weight with base camp authorities, who were beginning to understand that there were serious questions about the coordination and leadership of the original rescue team. Medical evaluation of the rescued individuals confirmed that they were in remarkably good condition, considering their exposure to harsh mountain conditions, for more than 48 hours. Dr. Cackett is at Chen's injuries were minor and required only basic first aid treatment. The overall health of the research team reflected both their own good preparation and Dr. Louise Walsh's effective leadership during their ordeal. As the rescued team was being processed through standard post-rescue procedures, Sarah began preparing her formal incident report that would document the day's events for official review. The report would need to address not only the technical aspects of the rescue operation, but also the circumstances that had led to her separation from the original team and her decision to proceed independently. The complexity of the interpersonal dynamics involved made it challenging to present an accurate account without appearing to place blame on her former teammates. Sarah's professional reputation depended partly on her ability to work effectively with diverse teams, and accusations of leadership conflicts could damage her standing within the rescue community, regardless of the specific circumstances involved. However, Sarah recognized that her successful completion of the rescue mission had provided clear evidence of her capabilities and judgment. The contrast between her efficient rescue operation and her original team's ongoing struggles on the mountain spoke more persuasively than any written report could about the quality of her leadership and technical skills. As afternoon turned to evening, Marcus and the rest of Sarah's original team finally arrived at base camp. Their unsuccessful rescue attempt had left them frustrated and defensive, and their reaction to finding Sarah and the rescued research team already safely at base camp revealed the depth of the professional and personal conflicts that had led to the day's events. The confrontation that followed would determine not only how the day's events were officially recorded, but also the future relationships between the individuals involved and their continued participation in mountain rescue operations. Sarah had proven her superiority as a rescue coordinator, but the cost of that proof would include the destruction of working relationships that had been important parts of her professional and personal life. Marcus arrived at base camp 90 minutes after Sarah and the rescued research team, his face displaying a mixture of exhaustion and barely controlled anger. The rest of the original team followed behind him, their body language revealing the strain of their failed rescue attempt and the internal conflicts that had developed during their time on the mountain. The base camp coordinator, Janet Sullivan, had spent those 90 minutes gathering detailed accounts from Sarah and the rescued research team. Her 25 years of experience in emergency management had taught her to recognize when official reports might not tell the complete story, and the accounts she was hearing raised serious questions about the leadership dynamics of the original rescue team. Dr. Walsh had been particularly articulate in describing Sarah's exceptional competence during the rescue operation. She made decisions under extreme pressure that not only saved our lives, but demonstrated a level of technical expertise and leadership ability that I've rarely seen in any professional context, Dr. Walsh told Janet. Her ability to adapt rescue techniques to our specific situation while maintaining our confidence throughout a terrifying experience was truly remarkable. Tom Rodriguez supported Dr. Walsh's assessment with observations about Sarah's problem-solving methods and communication skills. She explained every step of what we needed to do in ways that made sense even though we didn't have climbing experience. When we were scared, she gave us confidence. When we made mistakes, she corrected us without making us feel stupid. That kind of leadership under pressure doesn't come from training alone. Dr. Chen's scientific background made his testimony particularly credible when he described the technical aspects of Sarah's rescue operation. The route she chose was significantly more efficient than what the original team was attempting, and her modifications to standard rescue procedures were innovative solutions to the specific challenges we faced. From a systems analysis perspective, her approach was superior in every measurable way. When Marcus finally reached the base camp medical station where the rescued team was being evaluated, his first words revealed his defensive mindset about the day's events. "I'm glad to see everyone made it down safely," he said, his tone suggesting that he deserved credit for the successful outcome despite his obvious failure to reach the stranded team. Sarah was completing her preliminary incident report when Marcus approached her directly for the first time since she had fallen from the ledge 1,800 feet up the mountain. "We need to discuss what happened up there," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of threat that was barely concealed beneath a veneer of professional courtesy. "I agree completely," Sarah replied, her calm response contrasting sharply with Marcus's aggressive energy. The events of this mission raised serious questions about leadership, team coordination, and adherence to established rescue protocols. Janet Sullivan intervened before the conversation could escalate into open confrontation. "All team members will provide individual written reports tonight, and there will be a formal review process beginning tomorrow morning. Any discussions about responsibility or protocol violations need to wait for the official investigation." The establishment of formal review procedures brought a temporary end to the immediate tension, but it was clear that the conflicts underlying the day's events would require thorough investigation and possibly disciplinary action. The successful rescue had prevented a tragedy, but the methods used to achieve that success had exposed serious problems within the rescue organization's team dynamics and leadership structures. Rachel Torres was the next team member to confront Sarah. Her approach more subtle but equally revealing of her defensive concerns about the day's events. "I hope you understand that our decision to restructure the leadership wasn't personal," she said. "We genuinely believed it would improve our chances of completing the mission successfully." Sarah's response demonstrated the diplomatic skills that had made her effective in crisis management situations. "I'm sure everyone involved believed they were acting in the best interests of the rescue mission. The official review will determine whether those beliefs were supported by the actual outcomes." The carefully neutral language of Sarah's reply avoided direct accusations, while making it clear that she disagreed with her teammates' assessment of events. The contrast between her professional demeanor and their defensive reactions was becoming increasingly apparent to the base camp personnel who were observing these interactions. David Kim and Elena Rodriguez approached Sarah together, their obvious discomfort suggesting that they were struggling with guilt about their participation in the leadership coup. "We want you to know that we respect your abilities," Elena said quietly. "The decision to support Marcus wasn't meant to diminish your contributions to the team." "I appreciate that," Sarah replied, though her tone indicated skepticism about their sincerity. "I think the most important thing now is to ensure that the rescued team receives proper medical attention and that our official reports accurately document what happened during the mission." The focus on factual documentation rather than personal recriminations demonstrated Sarah's understanding that her best defense against criticism would be the objective evidence of her superior performance during the rescue operation. The successful outcome spoke more persuasively than any arguments about leadership philosophy or team dynamics. As evening approached, the base camp transformed into an impromptu investigation center where team members worked on their individual incident reports while investigators began collecting evidence about the day's events. The rescued research team had agreed to remain available for interviews, recognizing that their testimony would be crucial for understanding what had actually happened during the rescue operation. The radio communications that had been recorded throughout the mission provided objective evidence about the progress of both rescue efforts. Marcus's team had made optimistic reports during the early stages of their climb, but the recordings revealed increasing difficulties and coordination problems as they encountered the challenging upper sections of the route. Sarah's radio silence during her solo rescue effort had initially been interpreted as a sign of equipment failure, or worse, but her successful completion of the mission with the rescued team provided clear evidence that she had been capable of maintaining communication if she had chosen to do so. The decision to operate independently rather than coordinate with her original team would require explanation during the formal review process. The medical evaluation of Sarah herself revealed the physical toll of her solo rescue effort. Multiple cuts and abrasions on her hands documented the demanding nature of her free climbing across the cliff face, while muscle strain in her arms and shoulders showed the sustained effort required for the technical moves she had performed without safety equipment. The extent of Sarah's injuries made her accomplishment even more impressive to the medical staff, who understood the physical demands of technical climbing. She completed one of the most challenging rescue operations I've ever documented while dealing with injuries that would have prevented most people from continuing, the team physician noted in his medical report. The preliminary findings from the investigation were beginning to paint a clear picture of what had happened during the mission. Sarah's solo rescue effort had been more efficient, safer, and more successful than the conventional team approach that Marcus had insisted would be superior to her leadership. The objective evidence supported the rescued team's testimonials about Sarah's exceptional competence. Marcus's defensive reactions to these preliminary findings revealed the extent of his professional and personal investment in the leadership change that had precipitated the crisis. His insistence that the team approach would have been successful, if given more time, rang hollow, given the deteriorating weather conditions and the extended duration of the stranded team's ordeal. Rachel's technical analysis of the communications equipment and weather data provided additional evidence about the challenges faced during the mission, but her interpretation seemed designed to minimize the apparent advantages of Sarah's approach rather than provide objective assessment of what had occurred. The contrast between Sarah's straightforward documentation of events and her teammates' defensive explanations was becoming increasingly apparent to the investigators. Professional rescue operations required honest assessment of performance and outcomes, and the willingness to acknowledge mistakes when they occurred. 3 days later, the formal review board convened to evaluate the events of the Eagles Peak rescue mission. The panel consisted of senior rescue coordinators from neighboring regions who had no personal relationships with any of the individuals involved in the incident. Their mandate was to determine whether established protocols had been followed and whether any disciplinary action was warranted. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Dr. Michael Chen, and Tom Rodriguez provided powerful testimony about Sarah's performance during their rescue. Their detailed accounts of her technical competence, leadership ability, and decision-making under pressure created a clear record of superior professional performance that contrasted sharply with the original team's failure to reach them. Sarah Martinez saved our lives through a combination of technical expertise and leadership ability that exceeded anything we could have hoped for in a rescue coordinator, Dr. Walsh testified. Her decision to proceed independently rather than delay the rescue while resolving internal team conflicts demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment that we needed in our desperate situation. The review board's examination of the radio recordings, weather data, and route selection decisions provided objective evidence that supported the rescued team's testimonials. Sarah's approach had been faster, safer, and more appropriate for the specific conditions encountered during the mission. Marcus's testimony focused on his belief that team coordination and adherence to established protocols were more important than individual initiative, regardless of the outcomes achieved. His argument might have carried more weight if his team had successfully completed their rescue attempt, but their failure to reach the stranded individuals undermined his credibility. The board's final report concluded that Sarah Martinez had demonstrated exceptional professional competence during the Eagles Peak rescue mission, while her original teammates had failed to meet standard performance expectations. The leadership change that had precipitated the crisis was found to be unsupported by legitimate concerns about Sarah's capabilities. More significantly, the investigation revealed evidence suggesting that Marcus's fall on the narrow ledge might not have been entirely accidental. Witness statements and physical evidence raised questions about whether the incident that had nearly killed Sarah was the result of deliberate action rather than genuine mishap. The disciplinary actions that followed the review board's findings transformed the dynamics of the regional rescue organization. Marcus Chen was suspended from leadership positions pending further investigation of his role in the events leading to Sarah's fall. Rachel Torres received a formal reprimand for providing misleading communications during the mission. David Kim and Elena Rodriguez were assigned to additional training programs designed to address their failure to recognize and report inappropriate leadership dynamics within their team. Their participation in the leadership coup was attributed partly to inexperience and peer pressure, but they were required to demonstrate improved judgment before being assigned to future missions. Sarah Martinez was not only exonerated of any wrongdoing but was promoted to Regional Rescue Coordinator with expanded authority over team selection and mission planning. Her successful completion of the Eagles Peak rescue under extraordinary circumstances had demonstrated leadership abilities that exceeded the requirements of her previous position. The promotion represented vindication of Sarah's professional competence, but it also marked the end of working relationships that had been important parts of her life for several years. The people who had betrayed her trust would no longer be part of her professional circle, and the memories of their betrayal would influence her approach to team building and leadership for the rest of her career. 6 months later, Sarah was leading a new team of rescue specialists who had been selected based partly on their character and reliability rather than technical skills alone. The lessons learned from the Eagles Peak incident had convinced her that competence without integrity was more dangerous than inexperience with good intentions. The research team that she had rescued maintained contact with Sarah, and their continued gratitude provided ongoing validation of her decision to complete the mission independently, rather than compromise with people whose judgment she could no longer trust. Dr. Penn. Walsh later wrote a letter to the rescue organization's board of directors praising Sarah's exceptional performance and recommending her for regional recognition. The Eagles Peak rescue became a case study used in training programs throughout the mountain rescue community. Sarah's adaptability, technical innovation, and leadership under extreme pressure were highlighted as examples of superior professional performance, while the team dynamics that had created the crisis were analyzed as warnings about the importance of trust and communication in life-or-death situations. Sarah's command of future missions was never again challenged by her team members. The combination of her proven competence and the consequences faced by those who had questioned her authority created a foundation of respect and trust that made her subsequent rescue operations more efficient and successful than ever before. The scars on her hands from the free climbing required to complete the Eagles Peak rescue served as permanent reminders of what she had overcome through determination and skill. But more importantly, they represented her transformation from a competent rescue coordinator into a leader whose authority was based not on title or position, but on demonstrated ability to succeed when others failed. Years later, when young rescue coordinators asked Sarah about leadership during crisis situations, she would tell them about the day she was pushed off a ridge and chose to climb back up and take command of the mission that others had failed to complete. The story became legendary within the rescue community, not just for its dramatic elements, but for its demonstration that true leadership emerges from character and competence rather than politics and ambition.